So I'm going to be giving some background on self-compassion, on the research on self-compassion and teens first, and then we're going to show you a short video, and Lorraine is going to talk about the adaptations that we've made for our program from the adult mindful self-compassion program. So first, just some background on where teens are now. We know that teens struggle a lot. So here are some statistics on anxiety, depression, and stress. And we know that almost a quarter of all teens suffer from some kind of significant impairment. And it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. So we know that from 2012 to 2015, 3 times as many, or 50% of girls, their depression increased for girls by 50% and 21% for boys. And here's the statistic that really gets to me. So in 2014, compared to 2007, 3 times as many girls and two times as many boys took their own lives. So I'm really floored by this statistic, as I'm sure you are. I hear your gasps. So what can we do? What can self-compassion do? So we know that self-compassion is inversely correlated with anxiety, depression, stress, negative mood, things like that, meaning the more self-compassion you have, the less you have of these different things. Also, positively correlated with the things on the right. So the more self-compassion you have, the more you're satisfied you are with your life, the more self-esteem you have. And notice the sense of community and social connectedness. Remember what Jim Pub was talking about last night, how important that these things are. Also resilience and something we call curiosity exploration, which is moving outside of your comfort zone and taking on risks. So this is similar to the results that we see with adults, by the way. We know that self-compassion also has protective effects for teens. So for example, we know that teens, as they age, going from 10 or 11 to 18, depression increases, and it increases particularly for girls. But for those teens with self-compassion, with greater self-compassion, that's the line that you see on the bottom, okay? So their depression doesn't increase much at all, just a little bit in this sample. Compare that to the line on the top, the solid line. Those are kids with low self-compassion. We know there's also a link between perceived stress and depression. So the more stressed you are, the more you perceive yourself as being stressed, the more likely you are to be depressed. This is a study that's under review right now, so it's new data. But what we see is that those teens who have greater self-compassion are less likely to get depressed when they're stressed. So that's the line on the bottom again. Also, this is a study that came out of Portugal. We know that there's a link between depression and non-suicidal self-injury, cutting, for example. But again, for those teens who have high self-compassion, there's a weaker link. So they're less likely to engage in non-suicidal self-injury. So this is was a large study in Australia, over 2,000 teens, and what we see is that we know that low self-esteem is correlated with negative psychological outcomes or poor mental health. But for those teens who had higher self-compassion, again, a year later, they saw no changes in mental health, whereas for those teens who had low self-esteem and low self-compassion, they had worse mental health a year later, okay? And this were teens in grade 9 and then teens in grade 10, so they assessed them at those 2 different points a year apart. Okay, so 2 more studies, one in Spain. These were kids who were having trouble in school, academic difficulties. They had victimization when they were younger, particularly around physical being harassment and sexual abuse and neglect. And what we see here is that those teens who had high self-compassion had less negative psychological outcomes when they were teens. The study on the bottom is a study out of Israel, and these were teens who had experienced a horrific event, Mount Carmel forest fire. And what we saw was that those teens who had high self-compassion, again, had fewer overall symptoms. So the symptoms were things like PTSD, panic attacks, depression, suicidality. And those who had high self-compassion, again, had less of those outcomes. Okay, so this brings me to a study that was done. I don't know how many people are familiar with IB-Me. This is Inward Bound Mindfulness Experience. It's a 5-day mindfulness retreat. It's a fabulous program for teens. And what they found here, interestingly, were that positive outcomes at the end of the retreat, increases in positive mood and life satisfaction, decreases in things like rumination, stress, and depression. But interestingly, what they found was that although mindfulness was the driver of some of the outcomes, self-compassion actually drove more of the outcomes. And when this study first came out, I was really surprised, and I contacted Brian Galla, and I just said, what's going on here? This was a mindfulness program. And there was self-compassion driving more of the outcomes. And he said, yeah, I know. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked to see those results. So as Chris Germer, though, said this morning, compassion and mindfulness are BFFs, right? So both were working together to achieve these outcomes. This brings us to our study, Making Friends with Yourself, our program. Mindful Self-Compassion Program for Teens. And this is, I'm summing up two different studies here, two different pilot studies. And what we found at the end of the program was an increase in resilience and, again, curiosity and exploration, and decreases in negative mood, anxiety, depression, and stress. And right now we have a 3-year study funded by NIH where we are looking at kids with some depressive symptoms, not full-blown depression, and we're looking at outcomes. And this is, we're looking at making friends with yourself versus a active control. So I wasn't aware until this morning that we don't have studies yet with active controls. So we're really looking forward to seeing what this will bring in a year or two. And I just wanted to just say, I have one more slide here, and I just wanted to just comment about how inspired I have been by the interest in making friends with yourself internationally. And these are the different places where we've either trained teachers in the last 2.5 years or places where we will soon be training teachers. And so I'm just really excited to share this and to bring self-compassion to teens everywhere. So Lorraine's going to continue, and we'll watch the video.
Hello? Yeah. I guess I have to follow suit and be on this platform, although I don't think I'm...
Stand back here.
Oh, look at all the compassion here. Right before I came up, I asked Chris Germer if I could borrow one of his self-compassion practices that he used when he used to have anxiety in public speaking, but I'm good. All right, so I want to just briefly introduce this video. A couple of years ago, a woman up in Port Townsend, right outside of Seattle, her son suicided. It was about 3 years ago, and she started this program called the Benji Project, and she contacted Steve Hickman, who contacted me, and we went up and did a mindful self-compassion program for the adults in the community, and out of that came an interest in a 2-day core skills training that Karen and I went and taught, and out of that came teacher training and a full-fledged. They had 2 courses this last year, and then Karen and I went up this summer and did a 4-day intensive, and this is the result of the 4-day intensive.
Isn't it great?
I was internally stressed, and it wasn't necessarily things that were happening at school. Most of it was just myself trying to figure out things.
Over the past years, I've really struggled with my grades and keeping up with everything happening in school and stuff, and I just with the pressure of switching to high school, I ended up not taking care of myself physically either. I compare myself to people a lot, and I'm like, oh well, they're not feeling this way.
Sometimes we don't like ourselves, and sometimes when I didn't like myself, I would just lay in my bed. I wouldn't really want to get out of bed. I didn't want to go to the class. I was just like, it's not going to help.
I was really nervous and stressed out about going to the class about stress.
I liked the meditations because sometimes they would turn off the lights and we would sit wherever in the room that we felt comfortable. Some of us wouldn't want to get up from the ground. We were sleeping. We're just like, 5 more minutes.
We'd think of a place where we felt totally safe. So some people would be my house, my room, or some other people would be the beach. And then you're supposed to pick a friend that was there with you, and then they told you words that you really needed to hear.
It actually calmed me a lot. It, in a way, it kind of made me, feel better about myself.
It seems like it'd be kind of simple at first because you're just oh, you could just close your eyes and picture the beach. You're okay, I can do that. And then you kind of realize you're oh my gosh, wait, I'm not thinking about the beach anymore. I'm thinking about what I need to do for the next 3 weeks. And so it's actually quite a bit trickier than it seems, even though it sounds like a really easy exercise, and it really helps a lot after you practice it a while.
The second week we talked about physical touch and how it's soothing, and then they said that you touch, if you touch your legs and when you're nervous or something, or you go like this in class, you don't notice that you're doing that, but it's actually releasing things and making you feel better. And so now a lot of us said that we were more aware of when we were doing it and did it more often to relieve the stress.
We had this one class where we talked about how when you're a teenager, it's totally normal to butt heads with your parents because a lot of us feel, like I said, really guilty about that. And I know that really helped me because my dad and I butt heads a lot.
I know more about myself and how I can handle things now, and I'm not going to completely shut down or something because I know what I need to do to make myself comfortable.
If somebody said something hurtful to me, I feel like I know enough now that I'd be able to deal with it a lot better, and I could diffuse whatever anger or sadness it arose in me and take care of it in just a quick positive way instead of taking it out of myself for a long period of time.
We wrote letters to ourselves, and they actually got sent out after a month, and it was us telling ourselves what we liked and what we wanted to take away from the class, and that I really liked. And when I got it, I was like, oh my gosh, it's my letter. I'm so excited. I think that it would be really nice for younger kids to take the class so they know what they're doing later and not being feeling stuck, not knowing what to do with their stress. I think that they should know before it starts to pile on.
I feel like everyone should, especially people around middle school and high school age, because that, like I said earlier, it's really a hard time. It's you've been walking upstairs and all of a sudden you're the stairs have turned into an escalator. Oh my gosh, what is happening?
I feel a lot better about myself than I did before. I would tell the funders and the people that support the class that it helps us unwind and it helps us talk about how we feel, and it just, it can change us. They gave us these bracelets that we wear, and that was at the very end of the class. This bracelet says, "Be kind to yourself and others." I never took it off. It's all tied on here.
It's a great video, It's a great project. And I just have to say, and I'm sure Karen would agree, we are so privileged to be taking this program, which is an adaptation of the adult MSc program, into the world of teens throughout the world. We have had so many incredible experiences. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get into all of those tonight. What we are going to talk about is some of the adaptations we made for this teen program because, as you know, teens are different than adults. How many of you work with teens? Just raise your hand. Wow, quite a few. How many of you have teens at home? Okay. How many of you were once a teen? Yeah. I actually stole that from Dan Siegel, but I think it's a really good point to make because one of the things we experience in our teacher trainings is that many people who want to do this work with teens during the teacher trainings get back in touch with their teen self. And yeah, boy, talk about backdraft. It's very, very interesting. And I invite all of you, as we go through the adaptations, to think about yourself as a teen, or teens you may know, or teens you work with. Mm-hmm. So, adaptations for teaching teens. Oh, I can't see them. Can you see those? Not very well. I can't see them. Okay, so incorporated movement. So this is really important because, especially for the younger teens, sitting for an hour and 45 minutes is a struggle. You know, a lot of teens that come to our programs may have any number of issues. You know, they may be ADHD, they may have auditory processing difficulties. We get a lot of teens with clinical issues. And so incorporating movement is important. They get antsy, they get restless. We've integrated more mindfulness, and that's really important because in the pilot study, it showed that teens really do get self-compassion. But the concept of mindfulness was a little more difficult for them, and settling in was more difficult for them. So we incorporated more mindfulness, thank you so much, so that they really began to understand the importance of becoming aware. And, you know, you can't really practice self-compassion if you're not aware of the suffering. So, thank you. So we've got, one of the ways that we integrated it was through art activities at the beginning of each class. We recognized early on, through several trials, that when teens come to a class, as the same with adults, they come with a very busy mind from a very busy day. So then we, you know, put them in this opening meditation, and what happens? Their minds are wandering. They're thinking about what their friend said. They're thinking about whether or not they passed that test. So we discovered that if we introduced an art activity that was very much based on mindfulness, it helped them move from busy mind, busy day, into a more contemplative mood, which prepared them for the opening meditation. And they did so much better with that. We also learned that teens prefer very concrete practices. They like the here and now stone. They really enjoy the compassionate body scan, mostly because it puts them to sleep, and they sleep much better at night. But that's okay. That's okay. In the beginning, that's okay. They enjoy soles of the feet. They enjoy those informal practices. I've already said this. So let's move on to the next slide. So we also incorporated some icebreakers as a way of facilitating community building and as a way of really kind of trying to reduce their social anxiety. As I said, a lot of teens show up to our classes, to the groups, with high anxiety, depression, feeling vulnerable, feeling very exposed, restless, a lot of introverts. And, you know, connecting with one another is not easy. So if in fact you ever teach this to teens, always remember when you put them in groups, don't leave it up to them to get themselves organized, because they never will. So group management is another very, very big part of teaching teens. You have to facilitate what happens in the class at all levels as you're building safety and creating a really comfortable environment for them to learn. A lot of our adaptations of the didactic material was more through self-discovery than through actual teaching. Teens don't like to be preached at. I guess that's a fair way to say it. They come from school. They don't want to sit through another series of lectures. So making it more experiential and more through self-discovery is a really important adaptation. We use a lot of teen-friendly language. So self-compassion break became a moment for me. God, now I've forgotten what a pledge for me is in. Okay, what's a pledge for me called in the MSc class? Making a vow. Making a vow, there you go. So we changed it to a pledge for myself. We incorporated some information on brain development because teens like to know what's going on in their brain, and they don't understand a lot of the changes that they're going through in adolescence. So when we start talking to them about the brain, and their brain is under construction, and all the emotional stuff that's happening in their brain, they really appreciate that. We also have a whole session devoted to self-compassion and self-esteem. We talk about social comparison, measuring up, and all those things that are really relevant in adolescence. Teens suffer. Teens can be very resistant to self-compassion training, yeah.
I'm just trying to be compassionate here and here because we are over time on our panel.
Okay, all right, let me just finish this last one thing. So I do want to, because several of you have come up and asked about, well, how do you make these adaptations for teens, and why is it important to make adaptations? One of the biggest things that we know is teens show up wrapped in resistance. They don't want to be there. Their parents have dragged them there most of the time. And so knowing how to work with resistance is really, really important. What you see is that a lot of teens, if they're very resistant coming, they withdraw, they have difficulty connecting with others, they're very disruptive, they're angry, they're frustrated. So our program really focuses on how to work with that so that you can really help them engage. So what do you need? You need to be authentic. You need to be accepting. You need to be honest. And you have to have a sense of humor. It's so vital that you have these qualities when you're working with teens, because they can see right through you. And this is the best way to absolutely engage. And the most important thing is that loving, connected presence. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you so much.